This video guide is to show how to assemble the rifle out of the box, as well as later on I will have a full demonstration of how to disassemble all the components of the rifle for maintenance. So to start, this is how it'll be laid out in your box. The gun ships with both mags inserted with one round in each of them to apply pressure on the spring so it doesn't rattle during shipping. It comes with the ejection port assembly installed, and it comes with the bolt sled installed. So the first thing you'll want to do is put the bolt into the bolt sled. Once you do that, you'll want to line it up with the corner, and you want to make sure that the hole is smooth. There's a threaded side and there's a smooth side, and you want the smooth side up, and then you just thread in your bolt. There is not a spring in the bolt sled to return it to the closed position. The bolt sled's movement is based on friction, so you just adjust the bolt to keep it from just sliding around. You want it to be tight, but not too tight. Next, you want to put the barrel on the body. It has threads in each end, so it just threads on. Want to get it so that the rail for this bipod and the mag well, those line up, that it's centered along the mass of the rifle. For your bipod, it's easier to put it on if you open it up. It just slides onto the rail. And you want to align it with that back notch. Might need to just wiggle it a little bit to make sure it's inside the slot on the rail. Do it however you want, keep it open or closed. So next you want to put on the suppressor. It also is threaded. You don't want to go too tight, so you want to find that balance point of where it's on there secure, but it's not stripping, because you don't want to make it so tight you can't get it off. And then once again, the holes go on the side, and then you just want to line it up with the center of the mass of the gun. So to load up more of the ammo, there is the trigger, or underneath the trigger there is the mag release. Push that forward, the mag slides out. You can load rounds from the front into the magazine. It holds 3. And then when you go to put it in, you want to push it until you hear the click, and then you know it's locked in. You can also put one bullet in the chamber. So if you open it up, you want to put it tip first, and then you can close. And it should, there we go, slide in, and then just take it out. It's the same thing. You go forward. Bit of a tight fit, so if you push it too far forward, it gets locked in there and doesn't allow you to pull it out. So you want to be able to try to get your finger behind it without pushing it too far forward. We'll move back to the back end of the gun here. For the ejection port assembly, you can load one of the batteries in. Then you rotate the cover. There's a little notch in there to help you get grip. It'll rotate and lock into place. To eject it, when the bolt sled is back, you can slide it back and As long as it stays in the upright position, it won't eject, but when it drops down into the down position, it ejects. So that'll snap open. So then if you want to reload it, you got to make sure the bolt is back up so it's not pushing on the release for it. Rotate. And right now, since I'm not done painting, it isn't lubricated yet. It'll work a little more smoothly once the lubricant is in there. If you don't have the bolt in the right place and you're trying to close it, it won't latch, so you got to make sure that the bolt is at least back up on the edge, if not all the way forward again. So that's that. There we go. If you want to remove the magazine for the batteries, a couple things. There is the crank stock. So this has a lock on it that you want to rotate down. That gives you access to the handle. You can then crank the stock. You can lock it back into place. You ideally want to crank counterclockwise, so that it's with the threading of the screw, so it'll keep it from unthreading itself on you. But you also want to remove this lock if you're going to take the battery mag out. Battery mag slides out, and it also can hold your batteries, or you could also put like your phone in there. It is large enough for that. Load it up with the batteries. You will want to kind of keep your finger on it as you get it lined up in there, because they will shoot out on you. There you go. Got that loaded up. Now the body does come installed with the sling mounts on both the body and on the barrel. For the sling mount, you have this threaded piece here on the side. If you thread that plastic nut all the way down to the end of the screw, you can push, and that allows you to take the strap off while leaving the bolt head that it goes into intact. So that's an easy way to take the strap off if you don't want it on without having to unthread the strap or worry about taking the bolts out. Now for the scope has two brackets. If you'll notice here, one bracket has two little holes and dents drilled in it. That's to help you match them up. So if you take them apart and they get separated, you know these two go together and the smooth ones go together. They have one screw each. You don't have to undo it very much to get it open up. It doesn't thread in too deeply into the nut. And it doesn't take much space to get it open up to get access to the scope. So the scope, when you're putting it on 4x32, that's the back end. So what you do, you can just get these spun around here. Put a little bit of primer on there. Easier if the rifle's the other way. So then they go on these mounts here. when they're loose, you can just kind of slide them on. And then once they're slid on, you can kind of just put pressure on it, and you feel when it kind of locked into place on its mount. And then you just tighten down the bolt. Now you don't want to go too tight. So you just kind of got to feel it out. So the scope's on there. You do, whenever you're not cosplaying with it, if you're going to be storing it, you definitely want to make sure you take the scope off. Because while this is sturdy on there, it is one of the most fragile points because there's so little surface contact holding it on. It's very easy to whack this on something and break these. Just break the scope off. So when you're not using it, you absolutely want to take the scope off. Most other things you can get away with leaving on, but that is the one thing that you always want to make sure you definitely take off when it's not in use, to make sure you don't damage the scope, because the internals of the scope are also kind of fragile if that gets whacked around too much, and then the brackets are fragile in their mounting on the actual gun itself. So that is the assembly of the rifle out of the box. This part of the video is to show how you would completely disassemble the components of the body for maintenance purposes. Hopefully you should never have to do this, but if something gets a little stuck or you're having some issues, you can potentially take some of these components apart, clean them up, make sure they're working, or see if anything got damaged. So the first thing, we'll start with the battery mag here. Battery mag has a spring-loaded base that can be removed by removing these two screws here. I'll be taking photos for the manual too, so. So that releases the base. So what you want to do to take this out, you want to push down on the back end so this pops up here. And if you just kind of stick your finger in there, you can pull on the spring. This whole assembly slides out. And if you want to put it back in, just push it together. And it slides in. So, and then to reassemble it, you would just put pressure on it so that this is flush on the base. Put the screws back in. The long one goes in the back, short one in the front. For the battery mag, it's a similar system. This one is harder to reassemble because of the spacing between the bolt and the carry. So same deal, you take the little screw out and then it comes out. So for this one, there's a gap here. So you have this bottom and then there's another false bottom. So if you're going to take this out, try your best not to screw this screw out any further than you have to release the spring. base, because if you take it all the way out, it's hard to get it lined up with this hole and this hole because of the gap there. So it's easier if you just leave it. You don't have to bring it out more than about a little under 1/4 of an inch, somewhere between like 1/8 of an inch to 1/4 of an inch. Just kind of go till it, if you have it upside down, you know, this will just fall off when it's loose, so you know you're far enough. Next is the back half of the ejection port assembly. This is relatively easy to take apart. It's a little harder to put back together. So you have this screw here. This is a Chicago bolt that goes through the whole back of the rifle. So the butt comes off as one piece. And then this bolt comes through the inside. And there's a little white washer that goes on there. You want to make sure that you don't lose that washer. So I always put them back together. Now it's important when you're if you ever take this apart and you go to put this back on, or when you're just tightening it if it starts to come loose through use, is this is aluminum, so these threads are a little bit fragile. So when you're tightening, you really want to have one finger on the inside. It's in here. And it is notched, so you can feel you have one finger on the inside, so that you don't over tighten it. So when you're putting it on, you'll really just want to feel with your screwdriver. You want to make sure it's tight, but you want to feel for when it starts to really rotate on your finger. You know you got it. You don't want to make it too tight because it will strip those threads. And since they're aluminum, they will strip and then fuse, and the bolt won't be able to come apart. And then you got to try to cut it off, and that leads to a very high potential of damaging the gun. I already had one fuse on me during a prototype of this. The next step is you got to take these two screws off on this end cap. You want to use a Phillips head for this. Ideally you want one that's a little bit fatter and flatter of a tip, not one that's quite so rounded. You can also use, if you have a fat enough flat head, the flat head will work, but these screws work a little bit better with the Phillips. They give you that extra 2 points. But when the gun's like this, you can apply a decent amount of pressure. You don't have to worry about breaking anything, because these are right up against the PVC core of the rifle. So you can, it's pretty strong right here. You don't have to worry too much about applying some pressure if you need to make sure you don't strip the screw. Okay, so once that's out, it locks on the inside of the receiver here. So what you want to do is you want to kind of, this whole assembly, you just want to push up on it, and that'll release it. And then this whole core will slide out. As you see, there's a little spring on here. If this spring does come out at some point, it has a little hook here on the end, a hook here. The rounder, wider hook goes inside the ejection port body. And you want to come in from the side here, and you just wiggle it, it slides in. And then this end goes in that hole there. I'll show you how this reassembles here in a second. So then on the inside here, you see there's this plate with a little tab on it. That's what locks the ejection port closed, what is released by the bolt sled when the bolt sled comes down. This is in place. This cannot be removed. It's held in place by 4 pins in the body here. So that is the only piece on the internals that does not come out. That always stays in. So if you need to reassemble this after you've taken it apart, the easiest way to do it is you take your Chicago bolt, at the washer side on the inside of the port body. And then you line up the spring with that hole. And it doesn't usually go just completely in by itself because the angle to keep it locked in place, so you might just have to take your flat head and push it flush down in there. And then you just want to just barely thread the screw in. This is just to make sure the bolt doesn't fall out at this point. You don't want to tighten it down, but this is just to hold the assembly together. So you'll slide it in, and since you have some play in here because it's not tightened down, you have just enough play to hook it. And then you might have to wiggle just a little bit to get it to set flush. So now this is flush in there, and you can put your 2 screws in here. At that point, using your finger to hold it up, you would take the end off, set the butt plate on. And as you can see, that Chicago bolt just comes ever so slightly, just the tiniest bit above the hole there. There is a slight space for it, but it does still catch sometimes. So like I was saying earlier, you don't want to strip it, so you just want to tighten it so you feel it start to rotate on the inside. And at that point, you know you're tight. So that's how that part comes apart and goes back together. The front half can also come apart, so you want to remove the bolt from the sled. So it just threads out. And since the bolt is no longer holding it in place, you do want to ease it down there so it doesn't slam against that release plate and damage it. So now there's 3 screws here. That you need to take out, and they are Allen keys. If you do have to take this apart, for some reason, even though they were all the same size, the machining on the one wasn't quite perfect, and so it uses the equivalent metric size head. The Imperial one just doesn't quite, it's loose in there, so one of them will take a metric head. Let's see. I believe it is a 2 millimeter, and it's not labeled on here, but they're pretty small. So these don't have to come all the way out, you just have to get them loose. You can kind of feel if you're loose enough. And then this plug pulls out. And you do want to check here, yeah, I guess that one's still in just a little bit. And to make sure that these are smooth on the inside, they're not sticking out, they don't damage your bolt sled. So when you go to stick this back in, there's a little notch here, and that notch aligns with the top one. So then you'll just want to put it in and make sure that you kind of just eyeball it and make sure that it looks like the holes are going to line up with the screws, and then they'll kind of center out in the holes and make it perfect for you. Once you get that out, then you can slide the bolt sled out. The bolt sled does have a spring inside to help keep the bullets from getting stuck in there. Otherwise they would go all the way in. It's really hard to get them out at that point, so this just keeps them from getting stuck all the way in there. And put some pressure on them when you put one inside so it's not shaking in the gun. And this tab is what releases the ejection port. So that's how you completely disassemble that.